is Dr. Apoor Mehra, and before Sir starts with the talk, I have an interesting case to discuss with you guys. You can unmute and speak. All of you are allowed to speak. So I'll show the case. This is the X-ray of a young man. He presented to me with complaints of pain on the right knee. And on examination, he had tenderness on the medial joint line, more anteriorly than posterior. Range of movement was normal. Knee was stable. Came to me in the OPD. I asked for the X-ray. This was the X-ray he got done. So I can see subtibial spine spiking, some subchondral sclerosis, varus, both the sides. I usually get a AP standing X-ray of both the limbs. So this is the right side. This is the left side. And then the lateral views. I couldn't see the lateral views. And then I noticed that on the left side, I could see some margins which were more radiodense on the femur and tibia. On the lateral view on the left side. But on the AP view on the left side, could not see those tunnels. But I could see that there is something on the right side. So I could see something here. And I examined the patient again. And I could see the incision marks on the left medial aspect of the leg and small incision on the lateral aspect of the thigh. So there was something wrong here, and this is what I realized. That's how it should have been. This labeling was wrong. This should have been right here. This is the left. You know, the learning never ends. That's the point that we always speak. Always correlate. Clinical correlation. Your diagnosis should be supplemented with radiological imaging. And this error, although not very common, is also not very rare. So I just thought that it's been long. I had a word with all of you. And over to the Dr. Shailesh Pai sir for discussion of the cases that you people have given.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Arpit, and thanks, Dr. Apoor, for that interesting case where the mistake of one of our friends or colleagues can really jeopardize us. Imagine putting a knife on the wrong side, right? So with that knowledge in the background, now let us move on to week 4, which is about interesting cases. We had requested our subscribers or all those who had tuned into our previous 3 classes to send in whatever cases they felt was interesting or tough or challenging or anything for that sort. And I must say the response is not great, because there were 2 cases which have been sent, which we have included in this session, and other cases we have compiled from our own faculty members and from my database. So what we have learned till now about trochanteric fractures is we have finished learning about applied anatomy, the classification system, the different implant options that we have, what makes it unstable, the concept of instability, how do we decide, and what are the causes of failure? So one query was pending last week by one of the doctors, was asking a specific question about an intertan nail, that when we are passing a lag screw and the cork screw, inferior screw, if the lag screw does come out, what do we do? So since I was not an experience, I don't have experience of my own with intertan, we asked this to one of the surgeons who does a lot of intertan nails, and this is his exact reply. So uh, what he claims is that if the screw is coming out, then it is a mistake of the surgeon, or it is too osteoporotic. That means the screw does not have any purchase in the bone, right? So it is not in the proper location, or the bone is too weak. So how do we bail out in such condition? Is once we start noticing that it is coming out, stop it right there. Don't try to further compress or use a bone cement like a jugaad. Now, this is to be taken with fun, because yeah, we do use bone cement to augment our fixations, but please do remember that cement that we are using is little different. The trauma cement as such is not yet launched in India. It will be launched in the next quarter, I presume. But this trauma cement is totally different from the cement that we use for other things like joint replacement or muscular technique. So those two cements are not the same, right? So yes, it could be done, but this is the way what the surgeon claims needs to be done in case we are stuck up at that particular point, right? I hope that answers the question. So for this session, I would like to thank Dr. Daivik Shetty and Dr. Vineet Bachani, who had shared their case, one each, and then sincerely thanks Dr. Harpreet, who is a faculty, who is a colleague here in Conceptual, who digged into his database and gave a lot of cases with the complete follow-up, and Dr. Naufal, who also sent his set of cases with a complete follow-up. So whenever we discuss an interesting case, it is much better if we have the full series, so that the learning is complete. We can't stop at a certain point guessing what can happen, whether it might fail or it might unite. It's always better to have the complete series, right? So at this point, the case that is shared by Dr. Devik and Dr. Vinith is shown as the first and second case respectively. So if Dr. Devik wants to put in his comments or any questions, he can unmute himself and put in as to why he thought that this particular thing is interesting. So until now, what we have learned is for pre-op, we need to see, before we decide on surgery, we need to see whether the fracture pattern is stable or unstable. We need to know the choice of implant, whether the great trochanter is having a coronal split, the canal dimensions, and pre-existing deformities. Now, these 5 things is like a surgical checklist for any surgeon before he contemplates on operating a intertrochanteric fractures. I know from few of you may be asking the question of what about posteromedial comminution or fracture into the entry point, or other things which are more related to a DHS or other surface implants. But we have clearly learned from our previous talks that those do not matter as long as we're doing an intramedullary Indian. So these are the only 5 points that we need to consider as a pre-operative checklist. So we'll see how this could be applied in each of the cases, what we'll be showing. And then we have a post-operative checklist. The moment we have done a surgery or our colleague has done a surgery and we need to review it, which is the best time to review, the immediate post-op, because if things are not looking great, that is the best time to go in. It doesn't make sense to wait and expect it to fail, because treating a failed case is much, much more difficult than doing immediate conversion. So the post-op checklist 5 points are whether we have prevented varus malreduction, the anteromedial beak, we have learned that better to be positive or at the most neutral, but never negative. Whether the implant is seated in its proper position. This is with respect to tip apex distance, central, and posterior or inferior, where it is positioned. And rehab, we have learned that rehab is extremely important, because we put in an implant and these patients don't walk. It doesn't make any sense. So proper rehabilitation is part and parcel of the overall treatment procedure. And then we have our own enemies. That is, one is osteoporosis and infection. Osteoporosis, of course, is beyond our control, but we need to understand that these bones are osteoporotic and treat them. So we can't just be a surgeon, we need to be a clinician too. And then infection, although many times is beyond our control, but then the way we dissect, the way we handle the soft tissues also plays a big role in getting or not getting the infection, and seeing to it the comorbidities, especially diabetes, is well controlled.